The north is cold and full of whispers.
Otto Hightower had not sat on the small council in 3 years. Viserys had removed him with the gentle, terrible finality of a good man who could not bring himself to say the word dismissed, and so said nothing at all. Just a quiet conversation, a rearrangement of duties, and then the empty chair at the table where Otto had sat for a decade. Lionel Strong was hand now. The maps and the ravens and the formal instruments of power were Strong's domain. Otto had no seat, no title, no authority that any document confirmed. But Alicent was queen, and Alicent was his daughter. And in the particular calculation that Otto Hightower lived inside, those two facts were more useful than any seat at any table. He did not conduct his real work in the throne room. The throne room was theater, for the crown and the court and the 100 watching eyes that reported everything back to everyone. His actual work happened in a chamber 3 floors below it, where a single window overlooked the rooftops of the city, and a map table consumed most of the available floor, and the candles were replaced twice a day because Otto Hightower did not trust anything that might waver at the wrong moment. He was standing at the map when Alicent arrived. She closed the door herself, did not knock, did not wait for a servant to announce her. They had been doing this long enough that ceremony between them was only ever a signal that something had already gone wrong. "The Velaryons have sent a raven," she said. "Corlys is hosting again. Driftmark in the summer. Rhaenyra's boys will be there." "I know." Otto did not look up from the map. "Sit down, Alicent." She did not sit. She stood on the other side of the table and looked at what he was looking at. The Stormlands, colored in pale gray, occupying the bottom third of the map between the Crownlands and the sea. His finger was resting on a single point. "Storm's End. You've been looking at that for 3 days," she said. "I've been thinking about it for 3 months. He finally raised his eyes. They were the eyes of a man who had been at the center of the realm's politics longer than some lords had been alive, and they had the particular quality of absolute patience. Not calm, not warmth, just the absence of hurry. "The Blacks are building. Not loudly, quietly, the way water builds behind a dam. Rhaenyra Velaryon, Corlys, the Velaryons' fleet. The errands are non-committal but tilting. The Starks are too far north to matter unless the war lasts a decade, which it will not." He tapped the gray. "But the Stormlands. That is the thing that keeps me awake. House Baratheon is not an easy man to hold. No, he is an impossible man to hold with ravens and promises. He respects 2 things." Otto held up a finger. "Strength. A second finger. A deal he can touch with his hands." He lowered both. "We cannot give him an army. But we can give him something that lives in his hall, sleeps under his roof, and trains in his yard for 10 years. Something that turns the Baratheon alliance from a letter into a fact of his daily life." Alicent was quiet. She understood what he was saying. She had understood it, she suspected, from the moment he had first suggested it. Which was why she had not given him an answer then and had waited, hoping the shape of it would change when she returned to it. It had not changed. "You want to send Aemond," she said. "I want to send a prince. Aegon cannot survive it, Aegon requires comfort to function, and Storm's End will offer him none. Daemon is too young. Aemond is the only one who will not be broken by it." He watched her face. "And the only one who will come back better for it. He is 8 years old. He is 8 years old, and he has been sitting in this castle without a dragon for his entire life, watching his brother ride Sunfire and feeling every day of it." Otto's voice was not unkind. It was simply accurate, in the way that only painful things were. "He is being eaten alive by that Red Keep Alicent. The Hightower in him wants to earn something, and this city will not let him. Storm's End will." Alicent walked to the window. The city below was bright with morning, the docks already loud, 100,000 people living lives that had nothing to do with the conversation she was having. She pressed one hand flat against the stone sill and let the cold of it ground her. "He'll know what it is," she said. "He's too clever not to know what it is. Yes. Being traded. Being the piece that moves. Yes." Otto came to stand beside her. He had never believed in softening things for her, which was, she had come to understand, the most genuine form of respect he was capable of. But there is another way to say what it is. You can tell him he is being deployed, not discarded. Deployed, there is a wall in the south that needs a Targaryen standing on it, and he is the only one we have who is built for that wall. And the proposal itself, she said, it must come from me, not from you. Boros knows you hold no title. A queen's letter carries weight a dismissed adviser's does not. Yes, Otto said it without shame, because shame required him to believe his current lack of title diminished his usefulness, which it did not. The proposal goes under your seal. The thinking is mine. The authority is yours. That is how we do this. She turned. And if Boros mistreats him? If he decides a dragonless prince is not worth his courtesy? Then Aemond earns his courtesy in the yard, which is exactly what I expect him to do. She looked at her father for a long moment. At the map. At Storm's End, pale gray under his finger. Then she went to find her son. He was in the training yard when the page found him. Not sparring, the other boys had finished an hour ago, but alone against a wooden post, working the same combination of cuts that Sir Criston had drilled into him that morning. His doublet was dark with sweat at the back, and his arms were aching, and he did not stop until the page had said his name twice. He followed her to Alicent's solar without speaking. He had learned, early, that questions asked on the way to a room were questions answered before you had seen the other person's face, which meant you arrived already reacting rather than thinking. He preferred to think. His mother was sitting by the window, not reading, just sitting, hands in her lap, in the particular stillness she had when she had already made a decision and was waiting for the difficulty of telling it to someone. He sat down across from her. He was 8 years old, and his hands were blistered from the post, and he met her eyes and waited. "I need to speak to you about something," she said. "About what your grandfather and I have decided." "About Storm's End," he said. She paused. "How do you—" "I heard his voice through the door this morning, and you've been looking at me differently for 3 days." He said it without accusation. Just fact. "It's Storm's End." Alicent exhaled once, quiet. "Yes, we want to send you to foster with Lord Boros Baratheon, to live in his household, to train with his men, to be present there, as a guarantee of our commitment to his house, and in time, as a future match for one of his daughters." The word foster sat between them. He turned it over, examined it. It meant leaving. It meant no dragon, no red keep, no Robb or Criston, or any familiar stone. It meant a lord he had never met in a castle, famous for its storms and its hard beds and its harder men. He was aware that his mother was watching him, watching for the flinch. He did not give her one. "What does grandfather think it will do?" he said. "Not the official reason, the real one." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "He thinks the blacks are building alliances we cannot match with ravens and courtesy. He thinks the only way to hold the Stormlands is to put someone there who cannot be ignored, someone who becomes part of what Lord Boros has built, so that when the war comes, Boros does not weigh his options. He simply defends his house." A pause. "That is what you would become. Not a guest. Not a ward. A piece of Storm's End itself." Aemond said nothing. "I know what I am asking," Alicent said, and her voice was level but her hands in her lap were not quite still. "I am asking you to go somewhere hard, and remain there, and endure whatever it costs to earn that man's respect. I am asking you to do it for your brother's throne and for our house. And I am asking you to do it because of the 3 sons I have. You are the only one who can." He looked at the floor, at the stone, at his blistered hands resting on his knees. The red keep. The yard he had practiced in every morning for years. The window in his chamber that looked out over the bay. He did not want to leave. He looked back up at her. "When do I go?" he said. It was not a question. Alicent's jaw moved, just slightly. "Before the month is out." He nodded once. Then he stood, crossed to the door, and paused with his hand on the frame. He did not look back. "Tell grandfather I understand," he said. He went back to his chambers, sat at the window in the last of the afternoon light, looking out over the city he was leaving. The bay. The docks. The 1,000 rooftops going gold and then gray as the sun dropped. He had no dragon. He had no great deed. He had nothing yet. But he was already gone. Not in his body, not yet, in whatever place a person lives when they have decided something completely and the only thing remaining is the doing of it. He sat there until dark, and then he went to sleep, and in the morning he began to pack. The rain started on the second day, and did not stop. It came sideways, the way Stormland's rain came, but had not entirely believed until it was driving into the gap between his collar and his jaw, and there was nothing to be done about it. The road south was not the road between cities that the King's Road was in the Crownlands, wide, maintained, bordered by the evidence of civilization. This was older. Narrower, the trees pressed in from both sides, dark and enormous, their roots pushing up through the packed earth and ridges that the horses navigated carefully and the wagons hated. He did not complain. He had promised himself, on the last morning in his chambers, that he would not complain once between King's Landing and Storm's End. Not about the rain, not about the cold, not about the pace or the food or the hard ground when they camped. The promise was not for anyone else's benefit. It was a test he was setting for himself, and he intended to pass it. The Hightower guard escorting him were professional men who treated him with the correct mixture of deference and distance. They called him Your Grace and gave him the first choice of camp position and did not talk to him unless he spoke first. This suited him. He used the silence to watch the land instead. The Stormlands were not beautiful the way the Crownlands were beautiful. They did not have that soft, cultivated quality, the sense that someone had arranged the hills and the orchards and the fishing villages with an eye toward pleasing whoever was looking. The Stormlands looked like they had been here before anyone arrived, and would be here long after everyone left. The stone was gray and ancient. The villages they passed through were built low and tight, walls thick enough to hold against the wind that came off the sea, windows small and shuttered even in summer. The people watched him without the fawning he was used to from Red Keep servants. Cautious eyes. Measuring eyes. The eyes of people who lived in a place that tested things regularly and had learned to assess new arrivals quickly. He understood, in a way he could not have articulated at 8 years old but felt nevertheless, that he was entering a world with its own rules, and that those rules would not bend for his name. Good. Storm's End appeared at dusk on the 4th day, rising from the cliffs above Shipbreaker Bay with a bluntness that was almost offensive, not gradual, not picturesque, just suddenly there. As if the landscape had grown tired of subtlety and decided to place something permanent and irrefutable at its edge. The curtain wall was wrong. That was the first thing he understood. It was not merely large. He had seen large walls. The Red Keep had large walls, but it had a quality of solidity that those walls did not have. No seams, no visible joins between the stones. The surface swept in a continuous curve that his eye kept sliding off, unable to find a purchase point. Bran the Builder had put something in that stone that was older than memory and more durable than anything men had made since. He stared at it from horseback for a long moment. It had never fallen. He found, unexpectedly, that this meant something to him. He could not have said why. Only that standing in front of something that had never been broken was, for a boy who had spent his entire life being reminded of what he lacked, a very specific kind of feeling. He rode through the gate with his spine straight and his face neutral, and he did not let them see a single thing. House Baratheon received him in the great hall, not the throne room. Aemond would learn, in time, that Storm's End did not conduct its daily life in the throne room, which was used for formal occasions roughly 3 times a year. The great hall was where the castle actually existed, long tables, stone floors, torches in iron brackets, the smell of wood smoke and wet wool, and something animal underneath both. Boros was at the head of the room, not seated on anything resembling a throne, just in a large chair at the head of the largest table. Eating, he was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders, dark-haired, with a beard that suggested he had not attended to it in several weeks. He looked up when Aemond was brought in, looked him over in one slow pass from boot to crown, and set down his cup. The steward began the formal announcement. Boros held up a hand. The steward stopped. "Can you ride?" Boros said. Aemond looked at him. Yes, my lord. Not like a lord rides, like a soldier rides. Long days, bad roads. Can you? Yes. Boros looked at him for another moment. The eyes were dark and entirely without warmth, but also. And Aemond noticed this with the attention he paid to everything, without contempt. This was not the look of a man deciding whether to dismiss someone. It was the look of a man deciding what category to place them in. He turned to a servant standing near the far wall. Find the boy a bunk in the squire's wing, the east side, the one that doesn't flood. He picked up his cup again. Supper in an hour if you're hungry. He went back to his meal. The steward looked mortified. Aemond followed the servant. Supper was louder than he expected. The Baratheon daughters were already at the table when he arrived, 4 of them, ranging in age from perhaps 12 down to 5 or 6, arranged along one side with the particular energy of people who had eaten together every night for their entire lives, and had developed their own complete civilization within the bounds of a single table. He sat across from them. Accepted a trencher, poured himself water because the wine on the table was strong enough to smell from 3 feet away. The eldest, Cassandra, looked at him once, directly, in the way of someone doing an inventory, and then returned to her own meal with the controlled indifference of a girl who had been informed she might be required to marry this person and had decided to form no opinion until absolutely necessary. The second eldest was watching him openly, dark eyes. A particular set to her mouth that suggested whatever she was thinking was being carefully edited before it arrived as speech. "Is it true," she said, "that you don't have a dragon?" "Maris," said the third girl, in the flat tone of someone who said this name as a reflex. "It's a question," Maris said, without looking away from Aemond. He put down his cup, looked at her. "Yes," he said, "it's true." "Then, what are you good for?" Not cruelly, not with the specific venom of someone trying to wound, just directly, the way her father had been direct with him an hour ago, as if the question was simply a practical one that someone needed to ask. "The third girl, Ellen, he would learn," said Maris's again, with slightly more weight. "It's fine," Aemond said. Maris tilted her head slightly. Waiting, he picked up his cup again and drank. "I'll let you know when I've figured it out." The youngest, 5 or 6, small-featured, watching him with enormous open eyes, leaned toward him across the table. "I'm Floris," she said, with the gravity of a person making a formal declaration. "I know," he said. She seemed satisfied. She went back to her bread. The first morning in the yard, Sir Drace broke his grip. Not metaphorically. The master-at-arms was a man of 50, with a scar across his neck and the permanent squint of someone who had been hit in the face more times than he could remember, and his method of correcting a grip was to strike the wrist sharply with a wooden rod until the fingers opened. He did it to every trainee. He did it to Aemond twice before the boy adjusted. On the third adjustment it held. "Better," Sir Drace said. It was the only thing he said for the next 2 hours. By the end of the first week, Aemond's hands were raw at the palms, and he had a bruise along his left ribs, where a training sword had found the gap in his guard, and he had been knocked off his feet 4 separate times by boys 2 years older, who had been training in this yard since they could walk. He got up every time. He did not make a sound when he got up. In the evenings, after the other boys had finished and gone inside, and the yard was empty, he stayed. He worked the forms Sir Criston had given him, the King's Landing forms, too refined for this place. He was beginning to understand, too reliant on technique over endurance, and tried to make them harder, heavier, more like what Storm's End was asking of him. The rain came most evenings. He trained through it. He did not know, on that 9th night, that there was a window above the yard in the east wing. He did not know that the second of Lord Boros's daughters had a habit of sitting on its sill, with her knees drawn up when she could not sleep. He did not know that she had been watching him for 3 evenings. She did not know what she thought of him yet. The dragonless prince with the red keep posture and the hands that bled and kept swinging anyway. She pulled the curtain slightly forward, so that if he looked up he would see only the dark, and she kept watching. A year in, he stopped walking like a visitor. He could not have told you the exact day it happened. It was not a decision, not a morning when he woke and thought, "Today I belong here." It was more gradual than that, a slow accumulation of small knowledge that eventually reached a threshold. He knew which passages flooded when the bay storms came from the northeast rather than the south. He knew that the east kitchen served better bread than the main hall's kitchen because the east oven was older and held heat differently. He knew that the guard rotation on the seaward wall changed 40 minutes later than the posted schedule because the man responsible for it had a weak knee that slowed him on the stairs. He knew the castle the way you only knew a place you had moved through in every kind of weather, at every hour, without anyone to explain it to you. He was leaner now. The Red Keep softness, and there had been softness, though he would never have admitted it then, was gone. His shoulders had broadened in the way that a year of daily weapons work produced in a growing boy, not the refined musculature of a courtier's exercise regimen, but something harder and more functional, built for actual use. His hands, which had bled every week for the first 3 months, were calloused now at the palm and across the inside of each finger in the specific places a grip wore through. Sir Drace still hit him with the wooden rod occasionally. The occasions were becoming fewer. The informal tourney happened on a Tuesday, which was nothing, a day like any other, gray and loud with wind. Boros held them in the yard without announcement, no formal lists, no pageantry, just a cleared space and the household knights, and anyone else who wanted to try their hand. The rule was simple. You fought until one man yielded or went down hard enough to stay down. There were no prizes. The prize was the walking away. Aemond had watched 6 of these from the covered gallery. He had watched Sir Drace fight in 3 of them, watched the way the master-at-arms used his size, the particular economy of a big man who knew he did not need to hurry, the slight drop in his right shoulder that preceded his most powerful cross. He had been cataloguing it for 2 months. He walked down from the gallery on the 7th Tuesday, crossed the yard, and stood in front of Sir Drace. The yard went quiet in that specific way it went quiet when something unexpected happened, not dramatically, just the natural cessation of other activity, when something more interesting presented itself. Sir Drace looked at him. "You sure?" "Yes. I've put men your age in the dirt today." "I know," Aemond said. "I watched." Sir Drace picked up a blunted training sword and tossed him one. Aemond caught it. What followed was not graceful. It was not the kind of fight that made for a good story, no single brilliant maneuver, no moment of sudden reversal. It was a grinding, painful 40 minutes of Sir Drace hitting him with things and Aemond not stopping. The first strike across his shoulder went so deep into the muscle that his right arm went partly numb for 10 minutes, which meant he had to fight one-handed while the feeling came back, which meant eating 3 more strikes on his guard side that he could not fully block. He did not go down. He could not beat Sir Drace with strength. He had understood this from the beginning. The man outweighed him by 6 stone and had 30 years of instincts behind every movement. So he did not try to beat him with strength. He beat him with time. He moved, and kept moving, and made every strike that landed cost Sir Drace something, a repositioning, an overextension, a moment of recovered balance, and he waited. He was 9 years old, and he waited with the patience of someone twice that age, and eventually Sir Drace's breathing changed, and the right shoulder dropped in the way it dropped when he was committing. And Aemond was already not there. The combination that followed, 3 strikes in sequence, 2 deflections, and 1 clean hit to the side of Sir Drace's knee that buckled it, was not enough to finish the fight. But it was enough to make the master-at-arms step back and reassess. They circled for another 10 minutes. Aemond was bleeding from his lip, and his vision on the left side was uncertain from a graze to the temple. He kept moving. Sir Drace yielded. He did it simply, without drama, the way a man who had been yielded to many times in his life understood it should be done. He lowered his sword, nodded once, and stepped back. The yard was quiet. Boros had appeared at some point during the fight, sitting on the steps to the hall entrance, elbows on his knees, watching. Aemond had been aware of him without looking directly. Now he looked. Boros said nothing for a moment. Then, "You fight like a man who expects to be hit." Aemond was breathing hard enough that speaking was an effort. "I usually am," he said. Boros looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in those dark eyes. Not warmth, not pride, not any of the softer things. Simply a reclassification. A man updating his ledger. Eat at my table tonight, Boros said. He went inside. Maris found him an hour later in the far corner of the yard, cleaning blood from a split lip with the back of his hand. She came around the corner of the armory without announcement, as she did most things, and stopped a few feet away and looked at him the way she looked at things she was trying to decide about. "I thought you'd cry by now," she said. "In the first month I thought, a week, maybe 2 weeks, you'd go home, send a raven, something." He looked at her. "I thought you'd ask about my dragon by now. I know you don't have one. Then you already have your answer." "No," she said. She said it without the sharpness she sometimes used, without the particular edge she deployed when she was making a point at someone's expense. This was something else. Flatter, closer to honest. "I know you don't have a dragon, but you fight like you do." A pause. "Like you're already used to being the biggest thing in the room, even when you're not." He had no answer for that, not an immediate one. He pressed the cloth against his lip again. The wind off the bay came over the wall and moved through the yard, and the torches along the wall leaned with it. "My brother has Sunfire," he said after a while. "Gold and pink. Beautiful animal. He barely rides her." He said it without bitterness, which was the only way he permitted himself to say it. "My sister has Dreamfire. My brother Daeron will have something too, eventually, and I." He stopped. "You have the yard," Maris said. He looked at her. "It's not nothing," she said, with the directness of someone who had decided that what she was about to say was true, and therefore worth saying. "My father doesn't invite people to his table. In 2 years I've seen him do it 3 times. He invited you today because of what you did out there." She glanced toward the yard. "That's not what he does for people with dragons. That's what he does for people who've earned something." He was quiet for a moment. "You're being kind," he said. "I'm being accurate," she said. "There's a difference." She turned to go. "Don't be late to supper. He doesn't like waiting." The raven from King's Landing arrived 11 days later. Boros's maester read it to him in the solar, while Boros stood at the window with his back to the room, which was how he preferred to receive information, in motion or near motion, never static. The letter bore the seal of Queen Consort Alicent Hightower, formal and precise, the language of someone who understood that the weight of a crown behind a proposal was worth more than any individual name. It proposed a betrothal between Prince Aemond and one of Lord Boros's daughters, the specific match to be confirmed as circumstances allowed, a gift of flexibility, and a signal that the Green faction was not so desperate as to demand exact terms before the alliance was agreed. Boros did not respond immediately. He was quiet for 2 days. Aemond, who had been told by the maester that the letter had arrived, did not ask about it and did not change his training schedule, and ate at Boros's table as he had been doing since the sparring session, and said nothing about it unless spoken to. On the 3rd day, Boros summoned him. The solar was small and smelled of the sea and of ink. Boros was standing. He did not sit for conversations of any importance. "I've accepted the Queen's letter," Boros said. "You'll be betrothed to Floris when she's old enough for it to mean something. Until then, it's an understanding. Agreed upon. Settled." "Thank you, my lord," Aemond said. "Don't thank me. This means you're staying." Boros looked at him directly. "So you better keep winning in my yard." "Yes, my lord." That was the entirety of the conversation. The ceremony, 3 afternoons later, was brief. A small gathering in the sept, Boros, his wife Elenda, the daughters, 2 household lords, a septon. Floris was 7 years old and wore a dress that seemed to have been made for someone slightly larger, and she stood beside Aemond with the concentrated seriousness of a child who had been told this was important and was determined to perform importance correctly. She took his hand. Her fingers were very small. He held them carefully, the way you held something that did not know yet what it was. That night, he wrote a letter to his mother. He had written 5 since arriving, careful letters that reported rather than felt. This one was shorter than the others. He wrote, "The storm here is constant. I do not mind it any more." He sealed it and gave it to the maester, and went back to his chamber and lay on his back on the hard northern bed, and looked at the ceiling and listened to the wind work its way through every gap in the stone. He did not mind it. The raven arrived on a Wednesday morning while he was in the yard. A page brought it out to him, which was unusual. Correspondence was handled by the maester, sorted, filtered, delivered to Boros by the evening reading. That it came to the yard meant someone had judged it urgent enough to break the routine. Aemond wiped his hands on his training cloth and took it. He read it once, slowly, the way he read everything. Rhaenyra Velaryon, dead in childbirth at Driftmark. Funeral arrangements to follow. All lords of note were welcome to send their respects. He read the relevant sentence again. Rhaenyra Velaryon, rider of Vhagar, beloved wife of Prince Daemon Targaryen. Rider of Vhagar. He folded the letter, tucked it inside his jerkin, picked up his training sword and finished the form he had been running before the page arrived. All 12 movements, clean, beginning to end. Then he put the sword on the rack, collected his water skin, and walked back inside. He ate supper. He spoke normally at Boros's table, answering questions about the afternoon's sparring, listening to one of the household lords describe a problem with the eastern pasture drainage. He did not mention the letter. He slept. In the morning he requested a meeting with Lord Boros and explained, standing in the solar with his hands at his sides, that he wished to attend Lady Rhaenyra's funeral at Driftmark as a mark of respect on behalf of Storm's End. It was appropriate, he said. The lady was a great house's daughter and Prince Daemon's wife and the mother of 2 girls who were Targaryen blood. Absence would read as a slight. Boros looked at him for a long moment. "You want to attend a funeral?" Boros said. "Yes, my lord." Another moment. "Take Sir Wendell and 20 men." "Thank you, my lord." He was halfway to the door when Boros said, "And Aemond." He stopped. "Come back, with both eyes." He turned. Boros was already looking at his correspondence. Driftmark was everything Storm's End was not. Where Storm's End was built against the land, dug into the cliffs like something that intended to remain after the cliffs themselves were gone, Driftmark felt contingent, subject to the sea's opinion of it, graceful in the way of things that had learned to move with force, rather than resist it. The castle of high tide sat above the water on pale stone foundations, and the sound underneath everything was always the ocean, always present, a constant reminder of what the island rested on. The funeral was conducted with the gravity appropriate to a great lady's death. Lords and their representatives gathered in black. The septon spoke the words. Rhaenyra Velaryon was mourned in the correct forms by the correct people, and Aemond stood in the correct position among the guests of middling importance, not foremost, not forgotten, and watched everything with the attention he brought to all new environments. He watched Daemon Targaryen, who stood apart from everyone with the controlled grief of a man who expressed nothing, because everything was too much. He watched Rhaenyra, composed and watchful. He watched Jace and Luke, 15 and 13 respectively, standing with the fidgeting discomfort of boys who had been told to be still and were managing it imperfectly. Beside Baela, quiet and dark-eyed, stood her younger sister Rhaenyra, Daemon's second daughter by Rhaenyra, smaller, watching the proceedings with an expression that had not yet settled on grief or anger and had found something in between. He watched none of them look toward the eastern slope of the island, where Vhagar had settled in the 3 days since Rhaenyra's death. Ancient and enormous, curled on herself, still and dark as a landmass. He watched everyone not look at her and thought, she is still there. She is still available. He ate. He paid his formal respects to the bereaved. He went to his assigned chamber and lay on the bed fully clothed, and waited for midnight. There was no moon. The path to the eastern slope was not a path, it was a series of decisions made in darkness, picking across salt grass and loose stone, the sound of the sea loud on 3 sides. Sir Wendell and the men were at the guest quarters. He had told no one where he was going. He could hear her before he could see her. Not roaring, nothing so dramatic, just breathing. The slow, deep respiration of something ancient, the air moving through passages as large as tunnels, each exhale carrying warmth and the smell of old fire, and something mineral, like struck flint held close to the nose. Then he came around the last rise, and she was there. Every story he had ever heard about Vhagar was insufficient. She was the length of a city block, coiled on herself, her scales the color of old bronze in darkness, her wing membranes folded tight against flanks that rose and fell with the breathing he had heard from 50 yards away. One eye was partly open, not focused, not tracking, just the slitted amber awareness of something sleeping but never fully asleep. She was older than anyone alive could say with certainty, older than the stories told about her, older than the men who had written those stories down, old in the way of things that existed before the words used to describe them. She had carried Visenya Targaryen. She had helped forge the kingdom he was supposed to inherit a sliver of. He stood still for a long time. He had trained for 3 years in a yard built on the philosophy that the way through fear was not around it, but straight through the middle. He breathed in the smell of old fire and let his heartbeat do what it was doing. Fast. Too fast. The body's honest assessment of the situation, and then he took the first step. He walked toward her. Vhagar's eye opened fully when he was 20 feet away. The amber iris was larger than his entire torso. It fixed on him without blinking, without the readable expression of an animal he had ever encountered. This was older than expression. This was the thing that expressions were eventually descended from. He did not stop walking. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Either she accepted him, or she did not, and no words would change the outcome. And he had understood this when he set out, and he walked forward anyway. At 8 feet she moved, her head lifting from where it rested against her own flank, rising on the great neck, bringing her eye level with him. The breath that came from her nostrils hit him like a warm wall. He felt his clothes press flat against his front from the force of it. He smelled fire and time. He stood in it, and did not flinch, and met the amber eye and waited. Something shifted. He could not describe it then, and would not be able to describe it afterward. A recognition, perhaps, a decision. The inexplicable thing that happened between a dragon and the person it chose, which had never been adequately explained in any text he had read because language was not built for it. She lowered her head. The neck curved. The eye came level with his face, close enough that he could feel the radiant heat off the scales. He raised his hand and placed it flat against her jaw. The scales were warm. They felt geological. She exhaled once, long and slow, and it was done. The shouting started at dawn. He heard it from the slope, Rhaenyra Targaryen's voice first, then Jace, then Luke. Pitched with the particular fury of young people confronting something they cannot reverse. He was sitting against Vhagar's flank in the thin morning light, not asleep, just resting, and he stood when he heard them coming and walked out to meet them. Rhaenyra hit him first. She was 12, and she hit him with both fists, and she was Daemon Targaryen's daughter, and the force of it was genuine. He caught her arms. "She was my mother's," Rhaenyra said. Her voice was breaking. "She was my mother's dragon, and you." "She was riderless," he said. "Steady, she made her choice." Jace got between them. 15, taller than Aemond by 2 inches, with the dark eyes and the brown hair that everyone at the green table had been noting in quiet conversations for years. "You stole her," Jace said. "At a funeral. You came to our mother's funeral and you stole—" "Your grandmother's funeral," Aemond said. The precision was deliberate. Rhaenyra Velaryon was my blood, my family. I came to mourn her. And Vhagar was riderless, and I am Targaryen, and I claimed her. That is what Targaryens do. Luke had come up on his left side. Aemond registered this without turning, peripheral tracking. Something Sir Drace had drilled into him. Rhaenyra stood apart from the others. A step back, her face unreadable, watching the confrontation without joining it. The conversation with Jace deteriorated the way conversations between people with nothing to gain from courtesy deteriorated. Words first. Then, Jace pushed him. Then, Aemond pushed back, and Rhaenyra screamed something, and Luke had a knife. He did not see it in time. The pain was beyond description. Not the sharp pain of a cut. This was structural, fundamental, the kind of pain that communicated that something essential had been rearranged. His right hand went to his face before he knew he had moved it. He felt what he felt and understood it, and went down on one knee in the salt grass, with his hand pressed over the wound and the warmth running through his fingers. He did not make a sound. He was aware of Jace shouting at Luke. Of Luke saying something in a voice that had lost its anger and found something worse, horror at what had actually happened, what his knife had actually done. Of Rhaenyra going silent. Of Rhaenyra taking one step forward, then stopping, her hand at her mouth. Of the morning light, absurdly bright. He heard boots on the slope behind him, multiple sets, moving fast. Sir Wendell's voice. He turned his head enough to see the Baratheon men coming over the rise. What Sir Wendell saw when he crested that slope? A Baratheon ward, a prince of the realm. On one knee in the grass, with his eye gone, and 3 of Rhaenyra's children standing over him, with a bloody knife between them. "Get the maester," Aemond said. His voice was entirely level. "Now." Sir Wendell was already moving. He had an arm around Aemond before the sentence finished. 2 other men stepped toward Jason Luke with the wordless body language of armed men who had just found a reason. "Leave them," Aemond said. Sir Wendell looked at him. "Leave them. Take me to the maester." A pause. Through everything, through the pain that was rebuilding itself with each heartbeat into something comprehensive and total, he kept his voice flat and deliberate. "And Sir Wendell, when you write to Lord Boros tonight, write exactly what you saw, what position you found me in, what they were holding. Write exactly what happened. Yes, Your Grace. Every word. No interpretation. Just what you saw." On the ship back to Storm's End, he sat at the stern rail with the bandage across his face and the sea moving underneath him. The maester had given him something for the pain that softened its edges without removing it entirely, and the world had that particular quality of slightly unreal things seen through slightly too much feeling. Sir Wendell had obtained something from a driftmark jeweler before they sailed. He had placed it in Aemond's palm without comment. Small, cold. A deep translucent blue that caught the gray morning light and kept it. A sapphire. Cut to fit an eye socket, Aemond held it in his closed fist and looked at the sea. He was 10 years old. He had just lost his eye and claimed the largest dragon in the world, and he sat at the rail and breathed the salt air and thought, with the cold clarity that extreme pain sometimes produced, "She sends her bastards to her errands." And they cut out a prince's eye at a funeral and called it justice. Let that story travel. Let every lord in the 7 kingdoms hear what was done here, and let them hear who was holding the knife. He opened his fist. The sapphire sat in his palm, cold and perfectly blue. He did not hide it. He did not close his hand again. He held it up to the light and looked at it for a long time, and when Storm's End came into view on the horizon, gray and permanent and unbroken, he was ready. The guard on the seaward wall saw Arrax before anyone else did. He had been watching the horizon for 3 days without being told to, not because Boros had ordered it, but because Storm's End was the kind of castle where men developed instincts, and the instinct that had been running through the household since the ravens went out was the instinct of a place that knew something was coming and had positioned itself accordingly. The guard saw the shape against the clouds at mid-morning, too deliberate for a seabird, too fast for anything but a dragon, and too small to be Vhagar. He sent for the Lord. By the time Lucerys Velaryon descended into the outer courtyard, Boros's household was assembled with the particular organized calm of people who had rehearsed this moment in their heads for 11 years. Not obviously. Not in a way that would read as hostility. The stablemen who came forward to take Arrax to the dragon yard moved with professional efficiency. The steward who appeared to receive the prince was courteous, correct, the image of Stormland's hospitality. Bread and salt were produced without being requested. Lucerys was 19, and clearly trying not to show that he understood what the bread and salt meant, that Storm's End was honoring its obligations to a guest it already knew it was going to refuse. A serving girl brought him something warm to drink while he waited in the antechamber. She curtsied. She did not meet his eyes. She was not being rude. She simply had nowhere to look that was not already decided. He was shown to the round hall. The round hall was not the largest room in Storm's End, and it was not the most impressive. It had no ornamentation beyond function, stone walls, iron torches, a table long enough to seat 30 built from wood so old it had gone nearly black. The chairs were heavy. The floor showed centuries of use in its worn centerline, where men had walked the same path from door to table for generations. Boros sat at the head of it. He sat the way he always sat, not like a man performing lordship, but like a man at home in a room he had occupied his entire life, which was a more convincing authority than any performance could have managed. He had not dressed formally. He was wearing what he wore for working days, dark wool, a lord's practical clothes, with the single concession to occasion of the Baratheon seal ring visible on his right hand. At his right sat Aemond. He had positioned himself before Lucerys arrived, which was deliberate, not at the foot of the table where a guest might be placed, not along the side where household lords sat, but at Boros's right hand, the place of primary council, the place that communicated without any accompanying statement that the man sitting in it was not a visitor. He was wearing riding leathers, dark, with the silver clasp at the collar that the Storm's End armorer had made for him 3 years ago. The sapphire eye was fully visible. He had not covered it. He did not stand when Lucerys entered. He did not need to stand. Lucerys walked the length of the hall. He was 3 inches shorter than Aemond and built lighter, with the dark eyes and the brown hair that 11 years of Green Faction conversations had catalogued with exhaustive precision. He carried himself well, straight-backed, unhurried. Every inch of him committed to projecting the dignity of a prince delivering a queen's message. Aemond watched him walk the full length and make the calculation, saw him take in Boros, take in the household lords along the sides of the table, and then reach Aemond and pause, just fractionally, before his face settled back into its composed surface. "My Lord Baratheon," Lucerys said. He bowed correctly. "I come on behalf of Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen, first of her name, rightful heir to the Iron Throne, with her greetings and her words." "Speak them," Boros said. Lucerys spoke them. He had clearly memorized the message, and he delivered it without stumbling, Rhaenyra's appeal to the ancient bond between House Baratheon and the Iron Throne, to the history of Orys and Aegon the Conqueror, to the honor and power of Storm's End and Lord Boros's wisdom in choosing the right side of a war before the war chose for him. She offered friendship. She offered the gratitude of a queen. She offered the guarantee of Storm's End's elevated position in the realm she meant to build. She offered no marriage. She offered no land. The hall was quiet when he finished. Boros did not speak immediately. He looked at Lucerys with the flat, assessing patience of a man who had no particular interest in rushing. Aemond leaned back slightly in his chair. He let the silence run for another 3 seconds. "A curious thing, cousin," he said quietly, as if continuing a private thought he had decided to share. "My mother sent her message with a marriage proposal, a prince of the realm, offered to Lord Boros's house, a bond written in blood, the kind that doesn't end when letters stop arriving." He looked at Lucerys without expression. "Your mother sends her message with words." Lucerys looked at him directly. "My mother's words carry the authority of the rightful queen of the 7 kingdoms." "Rightful," Aemond said. He said the word as if examining it for damage, as if holding it up to the light to see if it held together. "My brother was crowned in the Sept of Baelor, by the High Septon, before the eyes of the city. He let that sit for a moment. He has King's Landing. He has the Kingsguard. He has the Lords of the Reach and the Stormlands." A slight gesture, taking in the room without particular drama. "As you see. The Reach has not declared. Old Town has declared," Aemond said. "The High Towers march with the Reach's finest men behind them." Lucerys's jaw tightened, just slightly. "There are lords across the realm who will not accept a coup dressed as a coronation. There are always lords who take time to read a situation correctly," Aemond said. "They generally arrive eventually. The ones who don't," he paused, "don't tend to matter for long." Boros moved. He set both hands flat on the table and stood, which was how he ended conversations in his hall, not with a gavel or a word, but with his body, which was large enough that standing constituted a statement. "Lord Baratheon," Lucerys started. "My house has given its word to King Aegon," Boros said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be loud. "I swore it. It's done." He looked at Lucerys with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of a man who did not see the point of softening facts. "Your mother asks for my support. I've given it to someone else. I've nothing to offer her." A pause. "And she sent me nothing I could take anyway. She sends her friendship. Friendship." Boros said the word the way he said words he had no particular use for. "My daughters eat friendship." He looked at the table, at the sapphire eye, at the prince sitting at his right hand who had trained in his yard and eaten at his table and become, over 11 years, something the round hall had shaped as much as it had been shaped by anything else. I made a different arrangement. It holds. Lucerys stood for a moment. He was trying to find something, some argument, some leverage, something that could shift the weight of a room that had made up its mind before he descended from Arax's back. There was nothing to find. The room had no open doors. He inclined his head. Then I will carry Lord Baratheon's answer back to my mother. "Do," Boros said. Lucerys turned. He walked the length of the hall with the same composure he had entered it with, which Aemond noted and credited. He was showing nothing. He was giving them nothing to point at. He was almost at the door when he stopped. He turned back. Not to Boros. To Aemond. He looked at him, at the sapphire eye, at the face he had known as a shape in the distance of his childhood, at the cousin he had last seen on the ground in the grass at Driftmark, with blood running through his fingers. He looked for a long time without speaking, as if he wanted to say something he had no words for, or as if he had words and had decided, finally, that speaking them would accomplish nothing. Aemond looked back. He let the silence run. He did not fill it with anything. He did not need to. "Go home, Lucerys," he said finally, the first time he had used the full name. Quiet, almost gentle. "Tell my sister I send my regards." Lucerys held his gaze for one more moment. Then he left. The door closed. The hall exhaled. Boros reached for his cup and drank, the sound of it loud in the quiet. One of the household lords along the side of the table started to speak. Boros held up a hand. The lord stopped. They sat in the silence for a moment, just the room settling around itself. Then Aemond said, "Excuse me, my lord." He stood, pushed back his chair, and walked to the door. The battlements above the western gate were empty. He climbed to them without seeing anyone, which suited him. The wind was running hard off the bay, cold and carrying rain, and below the walls the sea was moving in the long, deep swells that preceded weather. Arax lifted from the outer courtyard as he watched. The pale dragon climbed quickly, catching the wind under his wings, wheeling once toward the northeast before leveling out. Luke was pushing him. Aemond could tell from the angle of ascent, steep, urgent, wanting altitude and distance both. The dragon grew smaller against the clouds. He watched until Arax was a shape too small to read. Then he turned and looked at Vhagar in the dragon yard below. She was watching him. She was always watching him when he stood on the walls, that ancient amber eye raised from whatever she had been attending to, finding him with the unhurried certainty of a creature that had never needed to hurry in its life. He held her gaze for a moment. "Come on, then," he said. The storm came from the northwest, which was the worst direction for Shipbreaker Bay. Aemond had lived at Storm's End long enough to understand what that meant at a physical level, not intellectually, not from books, but in the body, the way sailors understood weather, the way farmers understood soil. A northwest storm came in fast, and it came in low, and it pushed the bay's famous currents sideways so that the water moved in 3 directions simultaneously, and the rocks that had broken 1,000 hulls became unpredictable in new ways even for men who knew them well. The light went first, then the horizon, then the sense of direction. Swallowed whole by cloud and spray and the roar that rose from the surface of the water like something alive and furious about it. He had Vhagar at 300 feet when the full weight of it hit them. She moved through it the way she moved through everything, with the absolute patience of age, adjusting without effort, her wing angle shifting incrementally as each gust came. Her great body reading the wind the way Aemond had learned to read opponents in the yard. Centuries of flying in storms had made her more storm than dragon in some essential way. She did not fight it. She used it. He could see Arax ahead, 150 yards, perhaps 200. The pale dragon was smaller and faster and under normal conditions would have been difficult to close on. But these were not normal conditions. The northwest storm was punishing for Arax in ways it was not punishing for Vhagar. The younger dragon was fighting the wind where the older one wore it, and the difference showed. Arax's flight path had the jagged quality of something being redirected rather than directed constant small corrections, losing altitude on the gusts and climbing hard to recover it. Luke was pushing him. Aemond could feel it from 200 yards. The angle of ascent, the urgency in Arax's movements, the dragon was being asked for more than the weather wanted to give. He was giving it anyway, because his rider was afraid, and dragons flew for their riders, and fear was a form of instruction. He should have felt satisfaction. He was waiting for the satisfaction, and it was not arriving. What arrived instead was the calculation, cold and automatic and already running before he had consciously decided to let it run, in the part of his mind that had been thinking about war since he was 14, and had never entirely stopped. A dead Lucerys is a martyr. He let the thought complete itself fully, let it run all the way through to its conclusions the way Sir Drace had told him to run footwork drills, not stopping when it felt right, but going the full distance to the wall. Rhaenyra receives her son's body. Or she does not receive it, because there is nothing to receive, just the sea and whatever the sea decides to return. Either way she has a wound. A real wound, the kind that does not allow for strategy because grief does not negotiate. Her lords have a cause, a prince killed above a Baratheon castle, the Green's first act of the war, a boy sent on his mother's errand. Every lord in the realm who is considering his position gets the same story. Aemond Targaryen murdered his cousin above Shipbreaker Bay. The lords who were tilting toward the blacks tilt further. The lords who were uncommitted look at their children. The realm goes to war with its teeth out. A living, humiliated Lucerys is something else entirely. He pressed Vhagar forward. Not to Arax's neck, he aimed for the right wing. The targeting was the hardest part. He had thought about it on the wall, before he mounted, while he watched Arax climb. The wing was membrane stretched over bone, not armor, not scale, not the reinforced chest and neck that a dragon used in actual combat. It was the vulnerable part, the part that made flight possible, which meant it was the part that mattered most if you wanted to ground something without killing it. The right wing specifically, because Arax's flight corrections had been favoring the left, which meant the right was already working harder, already slightly compromised by the headwind. He had approximately one pass at range before Arax's rider understood what was happening and changed course. He brought Vhagar in from above and to the right, closing fast, dropping altitude to put himself level with Arax's wingtip. The wind noise was enormous, not the roar of fire but the roar of air, of two creatures moving at speed through a storm system that had its own opinions about who was in it. Rain hit his face like thrown gravel. He could feel Vhagar's focus through the saddle, through the connection between rider and dragon that was not language and not touch, but something beneath both. She knew what he was asking. She had done worse. He gave her the command. She did not use her jaws. She did not breathe fire. She used her right foreleg, swinging it in a motion that carried the full momentum of her enormous mass. And the claws caught Arax's right wing at the second joint, the place where the membrane was most exposed, where there was no bone to deflect the blow. The sound was terrible. Arax screamed. Not the territorial challenge of dragons in competition, not the warning sound, but a higher register entirely, the voice of an animal in sudden, comprehensive pain. The right wing folded wrongly, the membrane torn in a long diagonal that Aemond could see even in the rain, even at this distance. Arax's flight path collapsed immediately. The careful correction stopped. For a moment he was simply a pale shape in the dark air, with no control over where he was going. Then he was going down. Aemond pulled Vhagar up, and to the left, gaining altitude, watching, Arax did not fall straight. The left wing was still working, and Luke was still riding, and between them they managed a spiraling descent rather than a drop. Not controlled, not safe, but survivable. The kind of impact that broke bones rather than ending things. He watched them hit the surface of the bay. The sound of it reached him 2 seconds later, huge and flat, swallowed almost immediately by the storm. He circled. Vhagar banked wide, unhurried, following a path that kept Arax in view below. The pale dragon had surfaced. He was struggling, the right wing useless, the left working to keep his head above water, the instinct to survive older and stronger than the injury. Luke was in the water beside him. Moving, alive, he circled again. Lower this time. On the coast, he could see lights. A fishing settlement, perhaps half a mile north of the bay's most dangerous rocks, the cluster of buildings visible only as orange points in the dark, And below those lights, movement, shapes on the water, pulling oars, heading toward the impact site. Fishermen who had heard the sound or seen the flash of Vhagar above the storm line, putting out boats in the dark because that was what you did if you lived on Shipbreaker Bay and something fell into it. You went. The boats were closing. He watched until he could see Luke's shape in the water clearly enough to read it, arms moving, head up, making toward Arrax. He was 20 yards from the dragon when the first boat reached them. He watched hands come over the side. He watched Luke pulled upward, alive, frightened, maimed in nothing permanent except his pride and his dragon's wing and the story he would carry home to Dragonstone. Which was the entire point. He held Vhagar at altitude for another 30 seconds, long enough for anyone in those boats to see her above them, enormous in the dark, circling with the slow patience of something that had chosen not to finish what it started, long enough for that choice to be visible, long enough for the men in the boats to understand, in whatever wordless way fear communicated its deepest truths, that the dragon above them had done this deliberately, that it could have done more, that it had not. He turned Vhagar south. The flight back was quiet. The storm moved east as he flew west, and by the time Storm's End rose from the cliffs, the rain had softened to the ordinary persistent damp that the castle wore as its default weather. He brought Vhagar down in the outer yard, the downwash scattering water from every horizontal surface for 50 feet in every direction. He climbed down. His hands were cold from the altitude and the rain. He pressed them flat against Vhagar's flank for a moment, feeling the warmth of her through his palms. She had done what he asked. She had done it precisely, which was not nothing. Vhagar had centuries of instinct that said to kill. And he had overridden them, and she had followed. He stepped back. The yard was not empty. Boros's men had been on the walls when he launched, and they were still there, watching from the parapet above. He counted 8 of them looking down, without looking up to count. He could feel them looking. He could feel the particular quality of silence that surrounded a thing no one was yet certain how to name. He had not killed anyone. He had done something considerably harder. He walked toward the hall entrance. At the door he paused, not looking back at the yard or the walls or the men watching from them. He was afraid of winning badly. He had not won yet. But he had not won badly either. He went inside. The raven from Dragonstone arrived 4 days after Arrax fell into the bay. Aemond was not present when Boros's maester read it. He learned about it secondhand, from Maris, who had been in the Solar when the reading happened, and who described what she had seen with her characteristic economy. Boros had listened without expression, asked one question: how long ago? And then dismissed everyone from the room except his master-at-arms. She did not know what the raven said. She knew what Rhaenyra's face had looked like at Lyanna's funeral, 9 years ago, when grief was a thing she was performing for the assembled lords. She said she did not think it looked like that anymore. He understood what she was telling him. He wrote a brief letter to King's Landing, not to Otto directly, not until there was something more material to report, and gave it to a page with instructions for it to travel on the next available ship. The letter described the Stormland's disposition, the state of the roads, the numbers Boros had put out to his bannermen. It was the kind of letter a good general sent, because good generals kept their commanders informed of ground conditions without waiting to be asked. He spent the rest of that day in the yard. The first response arrived from Connington on a Wednesday. Lord Rogar Connington rode through the main gate at mid-afternoon with 60 cavalry and a face that communicated. With the directness of a man who valued being on the correct side of a decision, that he had made his calculation early and was here to be visibly right about it. He was perhaps 40, hard-built, with the weathered complexion of someone who conducted most of his life outdoors. He dismounted in the outer yard, handed his reins to a stable boy, and looked around with the practiced eye of a man assessing the military state of a place he might need to fight from. His eye landed on Vhagar. She was settled in the far end of the yard, as she usually was in the middle of the day, still, enormous, the amber eye half open in the way that meant she was aware of everything, and interested in none of it. The yard had reorganized itself around her presence, the way rooms reorganized themselves around any large permanent feature. People moved at slightly wider angles, spoke at slightly lower volumes, performed their ordinary functions with a fractional additional awareness of where they were in relation to her. Roger Connington stood and looked at her for a long moment. He was a lord who had spent his entire life calculating advantage. He had ridden to Storm's End because House Baratheon had given his word to Aegon II, and House Baratheon's word was worth following. What he saw in the Dragon Yard confirmed, at a depth no raven could have reached, that he had been right. Boros received him in the round hall. Aemond was present, at the Lord's right, as he had been present for everything since the war's beginning. Connington looked at him with the particular respect men gave to people who had already done the thing they were arriving to help do. "The Bay," Connington said, meaning Shipbreaker Bay, meaning what had happened above it. "Yes," Aemond said. "And the boy is alive." "Yes." Connington nodded slowly. He was working through something. After a moment he said, "That was deliberate." "Yes." Another pause. Expensive decision. "Cheap war," Aemond said. "If it works." Connington looked at him for another moment, recalibrating. Then he sat down and accepted the cup Boros's steward offered, and said, "What do you need from me, and when do you need it?" Old Sir Harlan Grandison arrived the following afternoon. He came without ceremony, no cavalry display, no large party. Just himself, 2 household knights, a squire, and a cart with enough supplies for a week's riding. He was 63 years old, and had fought at the Stepstones under Boros' father, and had the permanent damage of that campaign visible in the way he moved, a slight drag in the left leg, the ghost of a wound that had healed imperfectly and been walked on for 20 years rather than rested properly, because resting properly had not been an option. He did not go to the Round Hall first. He went to the Dragon Yard. Aemond found him there an hour after his arrival, standing at the same point Lord Connington had stood, looking at Vhagar with the expression of a man who had seen many large things in his life and was honestly comparing them. "Heard about the Bay," Sir Harlan said, without looking away from the dragon. "News travels. It travels fast when it's interesting." He turned. His eyes were old and direct, and entirely without the deference that younger men sometimes performed around Aemond, not from disrespect, but from the particular freedom of someone who had outlived enough things to have no energy for performance. "Your Lord Father's father's father rode Meraxes," he said. "Did you know that? Not Vhagar. The other one. Aegon's sister's dragon." He looked back at Vhagar. "I never saw Meraxes, but I saw Caraxes once, at Bloodstone. Daemon Targaryen flying him over the harbor in the morning light." He shook his head once, slowly. "This is bigger." "Yes," Aemond said. "You know how to use her?" "I'm learning." Sir Harlan looked at him. "The Bay," he said again. Not as a question this time, "Yes." "You're learning fast." He turned toward the hall entrance. "Your Lord Father's son has my word, same as I told him in the Raven. I come when called." He paused. "I'm called. I'm here. Tell me where you want my men." 2 lords from the marches arrived together on the 4th day. They were younger, mid-30s, loud in the way of men who had not yet had the enthusiasm driven out of them by consequence. They had clearly been together when Boros's Raven arrived, which meant they had been discussing it before it came, which meant they had been watching the situation with the particular attention of lords who wanted to be first rather than right. They were pleased with themselves in a way that Aemond recognized as the specific pleasure of a bet placed correctly. He watched them from the gallery above the yard as they rode in. He noted their names. He noted the size of their parties, modest, which meant they had moved quickly rather than thoroughly, which meant they were men who would need to be pointed clearly at an objective, or they would improvise. He filed it all without judgment. Armies were made of men like these too. You needed the Grandisons, and you needed the men who came because they wanted to be on the winning side and did not examine the distinction too closely. You just needed to know which was which. The conversation with Boros happened on the walls, at dusk, the way their important conversations often happened, neither of them having sought it out explicitly. Both of them ending up at the same place at roughly the same time, because both of them had the same instinct about when the walls were the right place to be. The Stormlands host was visible from up here, the camp spreading south of the castle walls in a pattern that communicated scale without the camp, yet being at its full size. Fires across the plain. The sound of men and horses moving through the last of the light, supply wagons still arriving, orders called across the dark and the flat voices of men with work to do. "You let the boy live," Boros said. Not an accusation. Not a compliment. The tone of a man returning to something he had been thinking about for 4 days without yet having said it out loud. "Yes," Aemond said. "Tell me why. The real reason. Not the strategy reason. The whole thing." He looked at the camp. The fires. "The strategy reason is the whole reason." "No, it isn't." Aemond was quiet for a moment. "He's 19, he said, finally. He did what his mother told him to do. He flew to a castle where he already knew the answer was no, and he delivered a message he knew was going to fail because she sent him and he does what she tells him." A pause. "Killing him for that seemed—" He stopped. "Seemed what?" "Wasteful," Aemond said. "He's not the war. He's a piece of the war. Killing pieces when you don't have to is bad accounting." Boros turned to look at him. "I'd have killed him." "I know." A pause. "You think you're smarter than me." Aemond looked at him. There was nothing confrontational in Boros's tone. It was, as always, simply a direct question requiring a direct answer, and anything less than directness would be received as an insult. "You're a better lord than me," Aemond said. "I might be a better general." Boros stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was not a polite sound. It was a short, genuine thing, the kind of laugh that arrived before a person decided whether to let it arrive. It was the first time in 11 years Aemond had heard it. "Don't tell me that," Boros said, "until you've won something." "No, my lord." Boros looked back at the camp, at the fires, at the banners along the perimeter moving in the evening wind, Connington's griffin, Grandison's sleeping lion, the device of the 2 Marches lords, the dozen smaller house sigils that filled in the gaps like the individual stitches of something large. "My father never commanded this many men," he said, not proudly, just accurately. His father did. Once, the stepstones. He said it was the hardest thing he'd ever managed, not the fighting, the managing. "I believe it. You'll manage them fine," Boros said, with a bluntness that was the closest he came to endorsement. "They've all heard about the Bay. They're not afraid of you." He paused. "There's something better than afraid." The full muster assembled in the morning. Aemond stood on the curtain wall above the south gate and looked at it. The plain below Storm's End was covered. Not chaotically, the Stormland's men had organized themselves in the practical manner of a martial culture that understood the difference between a mob and an army, and what stood below the walls had the shape of an army, rough-edged but real. The banners of every major Stormland's house running across the front of it like a sentence written in wool and dye and wind. Tens of thousands of men, horse and foot and supply and siege, in proportions that made sense for a force, meant to move quickly through friendly and unfriendly country both. The Stormlands did not produce armies that sat. They produced armies that marched hard and hit harder and resupplied off the land and kept moving. Above the camp, so high she seemed to be a feature of the weather, Vhagar turned. She banked once in a long southward arc, the morning light catching the old bronze of her scales and returning it to the upturned faces below, and the sound that came from the camp was not a cheer. It was something quieter and more absolute than a cheer, the sound of 40,000 men encountering something that reset their understanding of scale. Aemond watched them look up. He thought about Otto Hightower, 3 floors below the throne room in a small chamber with a map table, calculating this moment 9 years before it happened. He thought about Alicent, sitting by a window, telling an 8-year-old boy that he was being deployed. He looked at the army assembled on the plain. Then Vhagar descended, and he went down from the walls to meet her. The round hall had not been used as a war room before. Boros had conducted his military business the way he conducted everything else, standing up, in conversation, with maps consulted when necessary, and immediately set aside when the conversation was more useful than the map. What Aemond built on the round hall table in the 3 days before the march was different, a complete picture of the southern crownlands rendered in charcoal lines on stretched linen, every castle marked, every road, every river crossing, every settlement large enough to shelter a column of men for a night. He had spent the better part of 2 years building this map from traveler accounts and merchant reports, and the occasional carefully worded question in correspondence that was really a question about something else entirely. He presented it to Boros and the assembled Stormlords on the morning of the second day. The campaign was straightforward in its logic, which was the quality he had aimed for. Simple plans failed less. "We don't besiege," he said. "Sieges are how you spend a year eating your own supplies, while a castle full of men waits for your patience to break. Every day we sit outside a wall is a day Rhaenyra's forces consolidate somewhere we're not looking." He moved his finger along the Crownlands roads, the routes that ran northwest from the Stormlands border toward King's Landing, the arteries that connected the black-held castles along the coast to each other and to Dragonstone. "We move. Fast and visible. We hit the first castle before the second castle has finished writing its letter about whether to resist, and we hit the second castle before the third has decided anything at all. The calculation for every Black Lord in the southern Crownlands becomes simple. Bronzegate fell in a day. Do I want it to be next, or do I want to survive this and deal with whoever ends up on the throne in 6 months?" Lord Connington leaned over the map. "And if one of them decides to be a hero? Then we make an example, and we make it quickly, and we don't discuss it afterward." He looked at Connington. "The goal is not destruction. The goal is velocity. We move so fast that the story of our moving arrives before we do." Boros, who had been standing at the end of the table throughout this with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man testing a structure by looking at it rather than touching it, said one thing, "And the dragon." "Visible," Aemond said. "Not deployed. Not against men. Against decisions." He looked around the table. "Vhagar flying over your castle is a different weight on the scale than a raven from Lord Baratheon. I want her seen. I want every lord in the southern Crownlands to stand on his battlements and do the arithmetic himself." Boros unfolded his arms. "March at dawn," he said. The Stormlords left the hall and went to their men. Bronzegate was 3 days' march from Storm's End on good roads. The roads were not good. The seasonal rains had turned the middle stretches to mud that took wagons to their axles, but the column moved anyway, the cavalry ranging ahead and the foot following in the churned path the horses made, and on the second day the weather broke, and the roads firmed, and the pace increased. Aemond rode with the vanguard. He had decided this in the planning stage, and had not discussed it because it did not require discussion. He was not a commander who watched from a hill. He was going to be where the information was freshest, which was at the front, and if that created problems for the household knights assigned to protect him then, the solution was for them to keep up rather than for him to slow down. Sir Wendell, who had remained in Aemond's service after Driftmark, and who had developed, over 9 years, the particular stoicism of a man who had accepted that, the person he was protecting was going to put himself in dangerous positions, and the only question was how well prepared the dangerous positions were going to be, rode 2 lengths behind, and said nothing. The vanguard reached Bronzegate's outer approach at mid-afternoon on the third day. Lord Buckler's castle was not large, a square keep inside a curtain wall, built on a low rise above the Wendwater, surrounded by the town that had grown up in its protection. Smiths, millers, a market square with a well at its center. The Buckler men on the walls numbered perhaps 300, which was everything the Lord had been able to pull inside his walls in the time available, which had been 4 days, which was not enough time for a man who had declared for the Blacks to become a man prepared for what was walking toward him. Aemond called a halt 600 yards from the gate. He gave it an hour. He spent the hour on horseback, in the open, visible from the walls, reviewing his position with the unhurried attention of someone who had time and knew it. He ate something. He spoke with Connington about the left flank's positioning. He did not approach the walls, did not send a herald, did not do anything that could be interpreted as urgency. Urgency was information. He was not in the business of giving information away. Then he rode to the center of the line, turned to face the castle, and looked up. Vhagar came from the south, low enough that the ground trembled slightly as she passed, her shadow sweeping across the field, and then the outer wall, and then the castle itself in a slow, dark passage that lasted perhaps 4 seconds, and then was gone. She did not breathe fire. She did not circle. She crossed the castle once, continued north, banked wide, and came back high, settling into a long patrol circle above the engagement that was visible from every position in the valley. On the walls of Bronzegate, the sound of men talking stopped. Aemond sent his herald. The herald rode under a white banner to the main gate and delivered the terms. Lord Buckler could open his gates, yield his castle, swear his sword to King Aegon II, and be guaranteed his life, his lands, and his household. His men would be disarmed and released. The terms were generous by the standards of the war that was beginning. They were generous deliberately, for the reason he had stated in the Round Hall: every castle he took without burning was a story that traveled to the next castle on the road. He gave Buckler 2 hours. The gates opened in 40 minutes. The taking of Bronzegate was conducted with the professional efficiency of men who had trained for this, without knowing exactly what they were training for. Connington's cavalry came through the gate first, moving to secure the walls and the keep entrance. The foot followed. Lord Buckler's garrison laid down their weapons in the market square, in front of the well, in a pile that grew with the particular shame-tinged relief of men who had been given permission to survive something. Lord Buckler himself came out of the keep last. He was perhaps 50, with the look of a man who had made a calculation and was not proud of it, but intended to live with it anyway. He stood in the yard and looked at Aemond and said, "I declared for Rhaenyra before I knew the full picture." "I know," Aemond said. "The picture has changed." "Yes." Lord Buckler looked at the pile of weapons, at the Baratheon banners going up on his walls. "Your terms will be honored. Every one." Aemond looked at him directly. "I need you to understand that, not because I'm asking for your gratitude, because I need every lord between here and King's Landing to hear that Bronzegate surrendered and was treated well, and for that story to travel faster than we do." Lord Buckler looked at him for a moment. "You're not what I expected. What did you expect?" "Something angrier," Buckler said after a pause. "Given." He gestured vaguely toward the sapphire eye. Aemond looked at him. "Anger is for men who haven't prepared," he said. "I've prepared." The raven from Otto arrived at the third camp, a day's march north of Bronzegate. He read it by firelight, alone, while the camp organized itself for the night around him. Otto's hand was precise, and even in the way of a man who wrote his own letters rather than dictating them, and the message was exactly what he had expected: commendation, caution, the hand's characteristic instinct to consolidate rather than push, the gentle suggestion that the southern front was secure and the army might hold its position while the broader strategic picture developed. He set the letter on the ground beside him. He did not respond until the campaign's end, which was 2 weeks away. Not out of disrespect, out of the same logic he applied to everything, Otto was thinking in seasons. Aemond was thinking in days. The two timescales required different information, and he was not going to spend the days of a fast-moving campaign writing letters about it. The second castle had sent its raven that morning. They were surrendering before the vanguard arrived. He had expected this. He had planned for it. But there was still something clarifying about watching the plan work at speed, not the satisfaction of being correct, which was a small thing, but the larger confirmation that the theory had translated into the practice, which was never guaranteed and was therefore always worth noting. He put Otto's letter in his saddlebag and went to find Connington about the road conditions north. Boros found him at the fire an hour later. They sat for a while without speaking, which was how they often occupied the same space, not requiring conversation to justify the proximity. The camp moved around them, the sounds of several thousand men making themselves as comfortable as field conditions permitted, someone arguing about rations 3 fires down, a horse unhappy about something at the picket line. "They're surrendering before we arrive," Boros said. "Yes." "You expected that." "I hoped for it," Aemond said. "There's a difference. You can plan for what you hope, and you can prepare for what you expect, and they are not the same thing. I planned for this. I prepared for them not surrendering." He looked at the fire. "The preparation is what makes the plan work. The lords south of here know what happened at Bronzegate. They know the terms were kept. They know the castle is intact, and Lord Buckler is alive, and his garrison went home." A pause. "And they can see Vhagar." Boros was quiet for a moment. "She's a weapon you haven't used." "Not yet." "When do you use her?" When something needs to end quickly, and nothing else will end it, Aemond said. Not before. A weapon you've used is a weapon they've assessed. A weapon you haven't used, he stopped. Is everything they imagine it to be, Boros said. Yes. Boros looked at him with the expression he occasionally produced when Aemond said something he had already thought but had not articulated. Not surprise. A kind of recognition. I'd have used her on the first day, he said. I know. And she would have burned Bronzegate, and Buckler would be dead, and the next castle would be preparing to die rather than preparing to yield. He looked at the fire. This way is slower, but it compounds. A long pause. The fire moved. The camp's noise ran underneath them, constant and low. The Connington boy, Boros said eventually, Rogar's squire, 16 years old, the blond one. He fought well at Bronzegate. I noticed. Worth watching. Already watching, Aemond said. Boros almost smiled. You see everything. I try. He sat back and looked at the sky above the camp, at the clear dark between the clouds. Somewhere above him Vhagar was out there, patrolling in the night, her own kind of shadow above the Crownlands. By the end of the week, the southern front would be locked, Rhaenyra's supply lines from the south severed, her options reduced to north and east, and the dragons she had that were not Vhagar. The war was not won. It was nowhere near won. But the ground was right now, and the ground was where everything started. He came back without fanfare, which was how Storm's End preferred things. The column returned through the south gate on a Tuesday morning, the cavalry leading, the foot following in the loose-limbed way of men who had been moving for 2 weeks and had finally stopped. The banners were wind-torn, and the horses were tired, and the men had the specific look of people who had done something and were now done with it. Not triumphant, just finished. Carrying the particular weight of completed work. Boros met him in the outer yard, not at the gate, not on the steps with his household assembled in formal reception, just in the yard, standing near the armory door with his arms crossed, and the expression he wore when something had gone the way he thought it would, and he was not going to make a performance of being right about it. Aemond dismounted. They walked together to the round hall without speaking. Inside, Boros called for wine. They sat. He asked 3 questions: the state of the road north, the condition of the supply wagons, whether the Buckler garrison had caused any problems after their disarmament. Aemond answered all 3. Boros nodded at each answer. Then Boros stood, which meant the meeting was over. Good, he said, which was the word he used when something was good and no further description was necessary. He went to supper. Aemond went to the battlements. Maris found him there. She came without a candle this time, in the last of the evening light, wearing a dark cloak against the wind off the bay. She did not announce herself. She came and stood beside him and looked out at the water the way she had always looked at things she was preparing to speak about, directly, without the sideways approach that most people used when they were about to say something that mattered. You'll be going to King's Landing, she said, after the wedding. I thought Floris was looking at you differently. We'll manage. He paused. She's a good person. Better than I deserve, probably. Probably, Maris agreed. He looked at her. She was looking at the sea. You built something here, she said after a while. Not with sentiment. She did not use sentiment any more than her father did, just stating what was true, the way she stated all true things, because they were true and therefore worth saying. All of this. The muster, the bannermen, the speed of it. None of it existed before you came. It existed, he said. The Stormlands existed. The houses, the men, the loyalty to the Baratheon name. I didn't build any of that. You found it and made it useful, she said, which is the same thing, in the end. He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved between them. Maris, he said. Don't. She turned and looked at him, the direct look, the one she had used since she was 12 years old, and had asked him what he was good for, and had waited for an honest answer. Don't make a speech. You're terrible at speeches. I know. Just, she stopped. She looked back at the sea. Don't die badly. He looked at her for a long moment. That, he said, is genuinely the most Baratheon thing anyone has ever said to me. She almost smiled. The fractional thing, the slight alteration at the corner of her mouth that was the only smile she had ever permitted herself. She pulled her cloak tighter against the wind and turned toward the door without another word, which was the only way she knew how to say goodbye to things she did not want to leave. He watched the door close behind her. Then he turned back to the sea and finished his drink in the dark. In the morning, his maester brought him the completed letter. He had dictated the last 3 lines of it from a campfire in the southern Crownlands. On the night after the second castle surrendered without a fight, when the shape of what he had built had finally become visible in full. He had drafted the military sections first, road conditions, supply state, the disposition of the southern front, the estimated timeline for consolidation. All of it precise, factual, the letter a good general sent to his commanders before he returned to them. The last 3 lines were not military. He read the full letter once, standing at the window. The military sections were correct. He changed nothing. He read the last 3 lines again. My lord brother, I was sent from this kingdom at 8 years old, with nothing to my name but my blood. I am returning to you with the Stormlands, 40,000 men, and the largest dragon in the world. I kept every promise we made. Keep yours. He folded the letter, sealed it, gave it to the maester. The Raven went an hour before dawn. The wedding was 3 days later. It was not the kind of ceremony that required description in epic terms. A sept, a septon, the correct words spoken by the correct people in the correct order. Floris stood beside him in a gown the color of storm clouds, with her dark hair braided with yellow flowers, and she held herself with the composed dignity she had been growing into for 3 years, and when she looked at him, it was with the clear-eyed steadiness of a woman who understood exactly what she was entering, and had decided it was worth entering. He held her hand carefully. He had learned this, long ago, from a small girl who had taken his hand with the seriousness of someone taking a very important nap, and he had never unlearned it. After, at the feast, Boros drank too much and said nothing that could be construed as fatherly sentiment, and made Aemond feel more valued than any fatherly sentiment would have managed. Ellen cried, which she would have denied under any subsequent questioning. Connington and the Grandison household knights made a great deal of noise at the far end of the hall. Even old Sir Drace, who had not smiled visibly in Aemond's memory, sat at one of the lower tables with an expression that had softened fractionally in the direction of something like approval. Maris sat with her mother and ate and spoke to the people beside her, and did not look at the high table more than twice the entire evening. The Raven from Otto arrived the following morning. The king thanks his brother for his service. The council awaits his counsel. Come home. 12 words. Otto Hightower never used more than necessary. He read it in his chambers while Floris slept, standing at the window in the early gray light, and he held it for a moment before setting it down. 12 words from the man who had sent him away with nothing but a strategy and told him to build something from it. No praise, no warmth, no acknowledgement of the scale of what had been done. Just the confirmation that it was time to move to the next phase, written with the absolute confidence of a man who had known, for 11 years, that this letter would arrive. He set it on the table. Then, he went to tell Boros he was leaving. The departure was at dawn. Floris stood in the gate beside her father, which was where a Baratheon bride stood when her husband rode to war, not weeping. Not dramatizing, just present, because presence was what the Stormlands offered in place of the ornate farewells that southern courts had made into an art form. She held his hand once, briefly, and said nothing, and the grip of it said everything she needed to say. Boros shook his hand. Not a clasp, not an embrace. A handshake, firm and direct. The Baratheon manner of sealing the thing that had already been sealed 9 years ago, in this same castle over a letter bearing the Queen Consort's seal. He looked at Aemond with those dark eyes that had been assessing things his entire life, and said nothing, because nothing was required. The handshake said, "You are mine now. In whatever way a man like you can belong to a place." Ellen stood slightly behind her father with her hands pressed together and her jaw set in the expression of someone concentrating very hard on not doing something visible. He caught her eye and nodded once, and she nodded back. And that was enough. Maris stood apart, near the armory wall, with her arms folded, and her dark cloak, and the expression that gave nothing away. He looked at her across the yard for a moment. She did not wave. He rode through the gate. Vhagar rose from the yard as he cleared the outer wall. He felt her before he saw her, the familiar displacement of air, the shadow moving over him from behind and above, the downwash that hit him like a warm wall and sent the honor guard's horses sideways in a chorus of complaint. She climbed fast, the old bronze of her scales going gold in the first light, and at 200 feet she banked and turned and circled Storm's End once. Just once. Below, the castle received her attention with the permanence of something that had stood through centuries of storms and would stand through whatever came next. The walls that had never been breached. The yard where he had bled every week for the first 3 months. The gallery where he had watched men fight before deciding to fight himself. The battlements where he had stood in the dark and listened to the sea and thought about wars that had not yet started. Vhagar finished her circle and leveled out and pointed north. He rode beneath her. 3 days later, in a small chamber 3 floors below the throne room of the Red Keep, Otto Hightower stood at his window. The map table was behind him, unchanged. The candles were fresh. Below, the city was moving through its mourning. 100,000 people and their 10,000 separate concerns, none of which had anything to do with the thing Otto was watching approach from the south. The shape appeared over the hills south of the Blackwater as the city was fully waking, not a cloud, not a trick of the morning haze, but a deliberate thing moving at deliberate speed, dropping altitude as it crossed the river. The old bronze of it catching the light of a clear morning in a way that made it visible from the ground for miles in every direction. Below, he could hear the city reacting, the sounds of ordinary life pausing, then resuming, then pausing again as the scale of what was overhead became apparent. Vhagar did not circle the city. She descended toward the dragon pit in a long, unhurried arc, and the shadow she cast moved across the rooftops like a slow tide. Otto watched her land. He stood for a moment longer, looking at the place where she had come to rest, the enormous shape of her visible even from this distance and this height. He reached for the parchment on his desk. He had been composing the letter for 3 days, since the Raven arrived from Storm's End. Not the 12-word reply that had taken 30 seconds. This was something else. The debrief, the strategy session, the full accounting of what the Southern campaign had accomplished and what it now made possible. He had been adding to it and revising it the way he revised everything, patiently, without hurry, taking the time that the thing deserved. At the bottom, he had left 3 lines blank. He dipped his pen. He wrote, in the precise and even hand of a man who had been at the center of the realm's politics longer than most lords had been alive, "The storm has broken. Tell my brother to hold the capital. I will deliver him the rest of the realm." He set the pen down. He looked at the words for a long moment. Then he blotted the ink, folded the parchment, and sealed it with the hand seal. The symbol of a man who had spent a lifetime thinking in seasons, while other men thought in days, who had sent a dragonless 8-year-old boy into a storm-wrapped fortress and told him to become something, and who was now reading the letter that proved, in the most material terms available, that the boy had listened. He called for his page. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.